These are the legends whispered in the night, stories of mystery, fear, and wonder. Welcome to Island Myths and Legends. The islands remember, do you?
They say River Mumma is just an old legend, a warning not to go near the water alone. But I've spoken to those who have seen her, and they don't tell their stories lightly. I was 16 the first time I saw something I couldn't explain, something that still haunts my dreams, even after all these years. It was a night much like this one, hot, sticky, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and river weed, the kind of night where the jungle never truly sleeps, where the insects whisper secrets, and the water moves like it's alive. I grew up near the Rio Cabra, where the river cuts deep into the land, curling like a snake through the jungle. My uncle, Samuel, was a fisherman, just like his father before him. He knew every bend, every shifting sandbank. He had a respect for the river, but no fear, at least not then. That night, we were fishing where the water was darkest, where the elders told us not to go. They warned us of River Mumma, the spirit that guards the golden table beneath the surface. They said she waits, testing men's greed. They said she drags the foolish ones down. But we were young, and warnings were just words. We set out in a small wooden canoe, carrying only our nets, our lantern, and a rusty fishing knife tucked into my uncle's belt. The river stretched before us, black as ink under the sliver of moon. The jungle pressed in on all sides, thick with the hum of unseen creatures. It was quiet, too quiet. The water barely rippled as we drifted. No fish disturbed the surface. Even the night birds, always calling, had gone silent. It was like the world was holding its breath. Samuel cast his net, the rope slicing through the stillness. Then I saw it, a glimmer just beneath the water. At first, I thought it was the reflection of the lantern. But as I leaned forward, my breath caught in my throat. It was a table, a golden table, resting on the riverbed, glowing as if lit from within. I should have looked away, but I couldn't. The carvings on its surface shifted like the patterns of the current. The gold shimmered, rich and heavy, more beautiful than anything I had ever seen. Called to me, whispering in a voice I didn't understand. Beside me, Samuel inhaled sharply. I turned to see his eyes wide, his face pale beneath his sun-darkened skin. Then he moved, slow, as if in a trance. He leaned over the edge of the canoe, reaching down. "Uncle," I hissed, grabbing his arm. "What are you doing?" His fingers trembled above the water. His eyes were locked on the table, unblinking. Then the river moved. Not a ripple, not a splash, just a shift, deep below like something waking up. And the hands rose from the water. Long, delicate fingers, pale as bone. Slender, too slender, stretching upward, closing around my uncle's wrist. Samuel gasped. He jerked, but the hands held tight. I saw her then, a face beneath the surface. A woman, her hair drifting like river grass. Her lips parted, her eyes, God, her eyes, bottomless, the color of deep water where no light reaches. She smiled, then she pulled. Samuel lurched forward with a cry, half his body hanging over the edge of the boat. The canoe rocked wildly. I grabbed onto him, pulling with all my strength, but it was like something else had hold of him, something far stronger than a man. The water remained still. No splashes, no waves, just those pale hands tightening. Samuel's face twisted in pain. His mouth opened in a silent scream. The knife. I lunged for it, nearly tipping the canoe. My fingers found the handle, slick with sweat, and I did the only thing I could. I brought it down hard across his wrist. The blade sliced deep. Dark blood bloomed in the water, spreading like ink. The hands let go. Samuel tumbled back into the boat, clutching his bleeding arm, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The golden table was gone. The woman was gone. But beneath us, the river still whispered. Samuel never spoke of that night. Not once. The wound on his arm healed, but he never went near the river again. He stopped fishing, stopped bathing in its waters. He wore long sleeves even in the hottest weather. And when he died many years later, I went through his things. Tucked away in a wooden box beneath his bed, I found the old fishing knife, rusted now, stained dark with something that had never washed away. And beside it, a scrap of parchment, a drawing crude but unmistakable, the golden table, and beneath it, the outline of a woman's face, waiting, watching, smiling. I never fish at night, and if you ever find yourself on the river, and you see something glimmer beneath the surface, look away, and pray she isn't looking back. People don't go looking for things they're not meant to find, not if they want to live, but sometimes curiosity is louder than reason, and greed will make a man deaf to every warning. I know this because I watched my friend die for something that should have stayed buried. And I know, without a doubt, that he never really left that river. It happened 5 years ago, but I still dream of it. I still hear the bubbles breaking the surface, see his eyes wide with something worse than fear. Something took him, and I don't think it ever let go. His name was Daniel. He was always the reckless one, the kind of guy who laughed at danger, who took risks just to see if he could beat them. We grew up together, diving in the Rio Mijo, swimming in currents that could pull a man under if he wasn't careful. We were good swimmers, no, we were the best. But the river doesn't care how good you are. That day, we were out by the old wharf, where the elders said the water ran too deep, too strange. They called it Mumma's Bend, said it was where River Mumma watched and waited, guarding something no man should touch. Daniel didn't believe in that kind of thing. He believed in what he could see, what he could hold in his hands. And he wanted the golden table. People talk too much, he said, adjusting his diving mask. If that table is real, we're gonna find it. There were 5 of us, me, Daniel, and 3 others, Corey, Jason, and Leon. We had been swimming in that river since we could walk. But that day, the water felt different. I didn't want to go down there, but Daniel dared us. You scared? He grinned, slapping me on the back. Come on, Malik. Don't tell me you believe in that old story. I did, but I wasn't about to say it. Fine, I muttered. Let's get this over with. The water was cold, much colder than usual. As I sank beneath the surface, the light faded, swallowed by the deep. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The river stretched below me, endless, the bottom lost to darkness. Jason and Corey stayed near the surface, but Daniel, he went deeper. I followed, the pressure tightening around my skull. My ears popped, my lungs burned, but I kept going. And then we saw it, the golden table. It sat on the riverbed, massive, glowing in the dim light. The carvings on its surface twisted, shifting as if they were alive. It looked untouched by time, as if it had always been there, waiting. I stared, frozen. Daniel moved first. His hands reached out, fingers hovering just above the surface. The river moved, not a current, not a fish. Something shifted in the darkness. A flicker of white, a shape too long, too fluid, vanishing before I could focus. I grabbed Daniel's arm. He jerked away, breaking for the surface. We burst into the air, gasping, our lungs burning. Corey and Jason swam closer. What happened? Daniel wiped his face. I saw something big, like a fish, Leon asked. Daniel shook his head. No, bigger. None of us spoke for a moment. Then Jason laughed. So, where's the table? Daniel hesitated. It's down there, I said. But, Daniel cut me off. I'm going back. I felt something deep in my gut. A warning. Maybe we should leave it, I said. Daniel grinned. You scared, Malik? I was scared, but I wasn't about to let him go alone. I took a deep breath. Fine. One more time. The moment we went under, I knew something was wrong. The river was silent. No fish, no movement. Just an emptiness that stretched forever. Daniel swam ahead, kicking deeper, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. I followed, my chest tight with unease. The golden table gleamed below, but this time, it wasn't alone. A woman stood beside it, her hair drifting like ink in the water. Her skin was pale, almost glowing, her fingers long and delicate. She didn't move, didn't blink. She just watched. Daniel didn't see her. He reached for the table. I tried to grab him, but her eyes snapped to me. Everything went black. I heard singing, low, sweet, curling around me like smoke. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then Daniel screamed. The darkness shattered. I saw him thrashing, bubbles spilling from his mouth. His body jerked unnaturally, like something was pulling him in different directions. I swam toward him. The woman was gone, but something else was there. Hands. Too many hands. They reached from the darkness, wrapping around Daniel's arms, his legs, his throat. I grabbed him, pulled with everything I had. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. Something old, something hungry. It was inside him now. Then, just as suddenly, he went still. The hands let go. His body floated up, limbs limp, eyes open and wrong. I kicked for the surface, dragging him with me. We burst into the air. He wasn't breathing. Jason and Corey pulled Daniel into the boat, slapping his face, shaking him. His mouth opened. Water spilled out. Gallons of it. More than a man should have inside him. His chest didn't rise. His skin was smooth, too smooth, like it had been in the water for days. I checked his pulse. Nothing. Leon's voice was shaking. He was only down there for a minute. Then Daniel gasped. We jumped back as his chest rose sharply. His eyes snapped open. He looked at us, but not at us, like he was seeing something else. Something behind us. He sat up. Water dripped from his lips. His movements were stiff, unnatural. Then he smiled, and I knew. Daniel was gone. Whatever came back, it wasn't him. We took him home. He didn't speak, didn't eat, just watched. His mother said he barely blinked. Said he stood by the window at night, staring toward the river. A week later, he disappeared. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just his clothes on the riverbank. Like he had walked into the water, like he had gone home. At his funeral, someone whispered that they had seen his body in the morgue the night before. And in the morning, it was gone. I don't swim anymore. I don't go near rivers, not even to fish. And sometimes late at night when the world is still, I hear bubbles breaking the surface. I hear singing. And I know he's still down there, waiting, watching, and he is not alone.
I still hear it sometimes. Soft, drifting on the wind, just beneath the surface of the river. A lullaby I never taught my daughter. A song I have tried to forget. It started on an evening like any other. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and the cicadas buzzed their endless tune. I was in the kitchen, humming an old lullaby as I cooked, my voice blending with the familiar sounds of home. My daughter, Anya, had gone to play by the river that afternoon. It wasn't far, just beyond the trees at the edge of our yard. She'd been there 100 times before. When she came home, something was different. She was quiet at dinner, pushing her food around her plate, her eyes distant. Then, as I tucked her into bed, she began to hum. A tune I didn't recognize. Low and lilting, strange and slow. The melody coiled through the dimly lit room, settling uneasily in my bones. "Where did you learn that, baby?" I asked, keeping my voice light. Anya turned onto her side, her small fingers curling in the blanket. "The lady in the water taught me." I felt a chill skitter up my spine. "What lady?" But Anya had already closed her eyes, her lips curving in the faintest of smiles. That night, I didn't sleep well. The next night, I woke to a sound, soft and distant, yet achingly familiar. Humming. I sat up, my pulse quickening. The house was dark, the only light a sliver of moon spilling through the curtains. Then I noticed something. Anya's bed was empty. A cold rush of fear gripped me as I swung my legs over the bed and hurried down the hall. The humming grew louder, floating through the air like mist. I found her standing by the open window. Her small frame was bathed in pale moonlight, her nightgown billowing slightly in the breeze. She was staring out toward the river, her voice carrying that same eerie tune. "Anya," I whispered, trying not to startle her. "What are you doing?" She didn't move, didn't blink, just hummed. I stepped closer and gently touched her shoulder. At once, she blinked, her humming cutting off. She turned to me with sleepy, unfocused eyes. "Mama!" My breath caught in my throat. "Come back to bed, sweetheart." She let me lead her away, her small hand cool in mine. As I closed the window, I peered out at the river, half expecting to see something move in the shadows. Nothing. Just the slow ripple of dark water. Still, I locked the window that night. And every night after. The footprints. But it didn't stop. Night after night, I woke to find her at the window. And then one night I saw them. Wet footprints. Trailing from the window to her bed. My heart pounded as I knelt, my fingers trembling as I touched the damp outline of a bare foot on the wooden floor. The prints were small, child-sized, but something was wrong. There were too many feet for just one little girl. I swallowed hard, my gaze snapping to Anya, fast asleep under the blankets. Her hair was damp. The scent of river water clung to her skin. Panic tightened in my chest. I knew then something had come inside. The next morning, I took her to the church. The priest listened as I spoke, his expression growing grave. He agreed to bless the house. Holy water on the windowsills. Prayers whispered into the walls. That night, Anya didn't wake. She didn't hum. For the first time in weeks, the house was silent. I let myself believe it was over. But sometimes, in my dreams, I still hear the song. Soft, calling. And when I walk by the river, I swear I hear someone humming just beneath the surface. And sometimes, on nights when there is no rain, I still hear the sound of splashing, right outside my window.
I still remember that night as if it were etched into my bones. It was one of those evenings when the rain fell in relentless sheets, blurring the neon of the city and turning every street into a canvas of dark reflections. I was driving my taxi along the empty roads, the wipers keeping a steady rhythm against the windshield. In my years behind the wheel, I'd learned that the city's nocturnal hours brought not just silence but secrets, and sometimes secrets that should never be disturbed. It was nearly midnight when I saw her. The fare request had come through with no address, just a single word, river. My mind hesitated for a moment, knowing that rides to the river were rare and often carried an uneasy air. But I was desperate for work that night, so I accepted without question. I followed the GPS's vague directions, winding along deserted streets until I reached the outskirts of town. There, the concrete gave way to gravel roads and the distant sound of running water. I pulled up near a lonely bridge that arched gracefully over a murky, slow-moving river. The air here was different, cooler, heavy with mist, and the steady patter of rain made the landscape seem like it belonged in another world. As I parked, I noticed a lone figure standing by the side of the road beneath a flickering street lamp. The figure was clad in a long, flowing white dress that shone faintly in the intermittent light. Her hair, dark and slick with rain, hung loose around her shoulders, and she looked almost otherworldly in that moment. For a second, I felt a chill, as if I'd been staring into an ancient, unspoken legend. I turned off the engine and opened the door. "Need a ride?" I called out softly. My voice felt too loud in the quiet night. She turned slowly to face me. Her eyes were hidden behind a delicate veil, and her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. A smile that was at once inviting and disturbingly empty. Without a word, she stepped into the back seat, and I could only notice that the air around her carried an inexplicable, damp chill, like the mist rising from the river itself. I started the meter and pulled away from the curb. The interior of the taxi felt stifling despite the overhead lights. Every shadow seemed to stretch and warp with the flicker of the streetlights outside. I glanced into the rearview mirror periodically, half expecting to see something amiss in her reflection. But her presence remained constant, silent, as if she were both there and not there at the same time. After a few minutes of uneventful driving through rain-slicked streets, she finally spoke in a voice that was soft and musical, almost like a whispered lullaby. "Take me to the river," she said, the words drawn out slowly, as though they carried the weight of ancient secrets. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. "Which bank?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual despite the growing unease in my chest. She did not answer immediately. Instead, her gaze drifted to the window, as if lost in a memory or a far-off dream. "Somewhere where the water meets the night," she finally murmured, her words barely audible over the patter of rain. I couldn't tell if she meant it literally or if there was another meaning hidden in her tone. The GPS had already given me directions to a well-known spot along the river, but as we neared our destination, the road became narrower and the surroundings more desolate. The city lights receded, replaced by the dark silhouettes of trees and the reflective sheen of rain on asphalt. Soon, I found myself on a gravel road that wound its way to a lonely stretch of riverbank. I pulled over near an old stone wall, its surface mottled with moss and time. The street lamp overhead flickered, casting erratic shadows that danced upon the water. "This is it," I said, glancing at her as I turned off the engine. "Is this what you meant?" Her head tilted ever so slightly as she regarded the dark, gently rippling river. "Yes," she replied softly, almost reverently. "This is where I must get off." I opened the door, and for a moment, the silence between us was broken only by the sound of the rain and the distant rush of the river. I watched her step out of the taxi and make her way toward the edge of the bank. Under the weak light, she moved with an unnatural grace, as if every step was choreographed by some unseen force. Before I could call out a warning or ask a question, she stopped and turned back to me. In that moment, I noticed something odd, a slight, almost imperceptible shimmer in her form, like the heat rising off wet pavement. It wasn't until she had walked a few paces that I realized her eyes were not looking at me, but rather fixed on something in the darkness along the river. A cold dread prickled at the back of my neck. I leaned out of the window, squinting to see what had captured her attention. Far down the riverbank, where the water merged with shadow, there was a dim glow, a light that pulsed softly, almost hypnotically. The atmosphere there was thick with mist, and the sound of the river seemed to deepen into a low, haunting murmur. Before I could utter another word, the woman reached out a gloved hand and pointed toward the river. "I must go," she whispered, and then, as if obeying some unspoken command, she turned and began to walk along the bank toward that eerie glow. Something compelled me to follow her gaze. I parked my taxi a little farther down the road, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I was witnessing something beyond the mundane. The rain had lessened to a soft drizzle now, and the mist was rising off the river like ghostly fingers reaching for the shore. I stepped out of the taxi, drawn toward the water. With each step, the world around me seemed to blur. A mix of rain, mist, and an inexplicable sense of foreboding. I followed the woman's direction, my footsteps echoing on the gravel. The river's surface was strangely still in this part, as if it were holding its breath. I reached the edge of the riverbank and crouched down, peering into the dark water. The glow I had seen from the taxi now pulsed gently along the bank, as if it were alive. I could just make out vague shapes in the distance, an indistinct form that might have been human or perhaps something else entirely. A gust of wind stirred, and for a moment, I felt as if the night itself had exhaled. In that breath, I thought I saw a ripple in the water that resembled a smile that was both inviting and chilling. I shuddered and glanced around. The silence was absolute, broken only by the persistent hum of the river and the soft drip of water from leaves. I returned to my taxi, my mind racing with questions and an overwhelming sense of dread. Once inside, I locked the doors and sat there for several long minutes, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. Had she simply wanted to be near the river, or was there something more sinister at play? The rest of the ride was a blur. I found myself driving back into the heart of the city, my hands trembling on the wheel. I couldn't shake the vision of that eerie glow and the mysterious figure walking along the bank. I tried to recall every detail of her face, every nuance of her voice, but the memory was as elusive as the mist that had swallowed the river. Later that night, when I finally returned home, I sat in the dim light of my apartment, trying to convince myself that it was all a trick of the imagination. a misinterpretation of a lonely night by the river. But as the hours passed, I found no comfort. The images of that spectral figure and the pulsing glow haunted my every thought. I even tried to sleep, but dreams of drifting down that misty river and of her cold, distant eyes left me restless and fearful. The next morning, I found a small, inexplicable token on my windshield. A damp, torn piece of fabric that looked strikingly similar to the white dress the mysterious woman had worn. My heart pounded as I picked it up with shaking fingers. There was no note, no explanation. Just that one piece of fabric, heavy with the scent of river water and something else I couldn't name. A scent that was both alluring and repulsive. For days afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter wasn't over. That the river, the woman, and that strange token were all connected to something larger. Something that transcended the everyday world. I began researching local legends, asking quietly around town about any tales involving a spectral woman by the river. I learned that long ago, there were whispers of a spirit, a guardian of the river, who would appear on stormy nights, luring lonely travelers to her watery domain. Some said she was a tragic figure, cursed by the loss of a lover. Others claimed she was a vengeful spirit, seeking to claim the souls of the unwary. I wasn't a man prone to superstition, but that night had unsettled me in ways I couldn't rationalize. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the city's dark, forgotten corners harbored secrets that defied logic. And that encounter, brief as it was, might have been my brush with something ancient and unfathomable. Over the following weeks, I began to notice subtle signs. Late at night, while I sat in my taxi waiting for fares, I'd catch a glimpse of a pale, misty figure in the rearview mirror. A woman in white standing by the river's edge, watching me. Sometimes, I'd hear a soft humming, a lullaby that sent shivers down my spine. I started locking the doors extra tight and avoiding rides to the outskirts of town after dark. Yet, despite the growing dread, I couldn't help but wonder if I was somehow drawn to that mystery. The encounter had awakened something inside me. A mix of fear, fascination, and an inexplicable longing to understand what had happened. I even started researching local folklore in earnest, visiting the town library and poring over old newspapers. I learned that many had reported similar sightings over the decades, a series of unexplainable events, each linked by the presence of a spectral woman and the inexorable pull of the river. One rainy evening, nearly a month after that fateful ride, I found myself driving along the same gravel road. The storm was lighter this time, and the city's neon signs glowed faintly through the drizzle. I was heading back from a late shift when my radio crackled unexpectedly with a local news bulletin. A brief report of a mysterious disappearance near the river. The details were vague, but the story mentioned a taxi driver who had recently encountered something unexplainable on a lonely stretch of road. My blood ran cold. I switched off the radio and drove in silence, my thoughts churning with worry and regret. Had I unwittingly played a part in something dangerous? Had my own encounter with that spectral woman somehow unleashed a chain of events I couldn't control? That night, as I prepared to close up the taxi depot, I found another token waiting for me on the dashboard. A small, antique key with intricate engravings that glinted in the dim light. There was no note, just the silent, weighty key that seemed to pulse with a quiet, ominous energy. I couldn't tell if it was meant as a message, a warning, or a summons. I spent the rest of the night in restless contemplation. The key, the torn piece of fabric, the memory of her voice. It all coalesced into a mystery that both repelled and captivated me. I realized that the midnight fair wasn't just a chance encounter. It was a thread that tied me to something larger, a tapestry woven from forgotten legends and spectral memories. And no matter how hard I tried to dismiss it, I knew that the river would continue to whisper its secrets, calling out to those who dared to listen. In the weeks that followed, my nights became a blend of sleepless worry and a growing compulsion to return to that riverbank. I found myself driving the same deserted roads, stopping occasionally to peer into the darkness where the water met the sky. I never saw her again, at least not clearly, but every so often, when the rain was just right and the fog rolled in, I would catch a glimpse of something in the distance. a pale figure moving slowly along the bank or a flash of white where there should be nothing. Even now, I sometimes wonder if my fate was sealed that night when I picked up the midnight fare. I try to reassure myself with rational thoughts, telling myself that it was only a peculiar, isolated incident. Yet, deep in my heart, I know that some experiences cannot be explained away by logic or reason. They linger, haunting the corners of your mind, reminding you that there is a world beyond our understanding. A world where the veil between life and something else is dangerously thin. I continue to drive my taxi, navigating the dark streets and sleepless nights, forever mindful of the river and the mysterious woman who once asked for a ride. And each time I pass by that lonely stretch of road, I feel the weight of her silent gaze, as if she is still watching from the darkness, waiting for someone else to answer her call. For now, I lock my doors a little tighter, drive a little slower, and carry that antique key with me as both a reminder and a warning. The midnight fare has changed me in ways I cannot fully describe, rendered me cautious, haunted, and yet curiously compelled to seek out the mysteries that hide in the night. I have learned that some secrets are not meant to be uncovered, that some farewells from the midnight world carry a heavy price. And while I may never know the full truth of that eerie encounter, I know that the river, and the spirit who rides its edge, will always be a part of me. Their memory echoes in every drop of rain, in every silent moment between the tick of the clock, and in every lonely, midnight fare that comes my way. And so, on nights when the rain softens and the mist drifts in like whispered promises, I still glance into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her ghostly reflection. The midnight fare lives on, not just as a tale of that singular, inexplicable ride, but as a reminder that the line between our world and the realm of legends is thinner than we ever dare to believe. There are things in this world we are not meant to find, things buried for a reason, cursed things waiting in the dark for the right fool to come along. I was that fool. It started with an old tale, one every Jamaican child had heard but few ever believed. The story of the Golden Table. According to legend, centuries ago, Spanish conquistadors, fleeing from the British, dumped their treasure into the Rio Cabra to keep it from falling into enemy hands. Among the riches was a solid gold table, shimmering beneath the water like a sunken dream. But it was no ordinary treasure. It was guarded by River Mumma, the mysterious woman of the waters, a spirit with long flowing hair who would lure the greedy to their doom. No one who had ever gone looking for the golden table had returned. But greed is louder than fear, and men will always believe they are different. My name is David Sinclair, and I was a diver by trade. I made my living exploring the depths of the sea, salvaging what others had lost. But business had dried up, and desperation had started whispering in my ear. That was when my friend, Malik, came to me with an idea. "I know where the table is," he said one night, his voice hushed over cheap rum and candlelight. "I've seen it, man, shining like heaven under the water." I laughed at first. "You sound like an old-time fool. That story is just meant to keep children from drowning in the river." Malik leaned in, his dark eyes feverish. "I went diving last week. I was just fooling around, looking for fish, when I saw something glinting deep below. It was gold, I swear it. I tried to get closer, but something pushed me back." He shivered, like an unseen hand. I stared at him. Malik was not the type to scare easily. "I need another diver," he said. "Someone with experience. We pull it out together, we split it 50-50. I hesitated. Everything in me screamed to walk away. But I thought about my empty pockets, my overdue rent, the dull ache of failure gnawing at my ribs. Fool that I was, I agreed. We set out the next evening, under the light of a swollen moon. The river was calm, but the air carried a strange heaviness, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Malik led the way, guiding me to the spot where he had seen the table. We waded into the water, the coolness wrapping around us like a whispering embrace. The river was deeper than it looked, its surface hiding unseen dangers below. With our oxygen tanks secured, we descended. The world beneath the water was eerily quiet, muffled and distorted. The deeper we went, the darker it became, until only the faint glow of our flashlights cut through the gloom. Then I saw it. It lay at the bottom, half buried in silt, its golden surface gleaming even through centuries of mud and decay. My breath caught. It was real, and we were about to be rich. I reached out to touch it, but the moment my fingers brushed the surface, a cold shock jolted through me. A whisper coiled around my ears. Not a sound, but a feeling, ancient and hungry. Leave it. I yanked my hand back, heart hammering. Malik was already securing the ropes, ignoring the strange current that had begun to swirl around us. The water had changed. It felt alive, pulsing with something unseen. I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe it was just my nerves. Maybe I was letting an old legend get into my head. Together, we worked quickly, tying the ropes around the table's legs, preparing to hoist it up. The silt billowed around us like smoke, making the water murky, shadowy. Then, a flicker of movement. I turned sharply, flashlight sweeping over the depths. First, I saw nothing, just shifting currents and restless sand. Then I saw her, a woman, floating just beyond the table. Her hair billowed like seaweed, her skin a pale, ghostly blue, her eyes dark, endless voids, locked onto mine. River Mumma. Malik didn't see her. He was too focused on the treasure, his fingers working feverishly to secure the last rope. She raised one long, delicate hand, and the river came alive. The current surged violently, knocking me backward. My flashlight tumbled from my grip, spinning wildly as it sank into the depths. The glow caught glimpses of movement, shapes swirling in the darkness, shadows slithering through the water like silent predators. Malik struggled against the sudden force, bubbles bursting from his regulator in frantic bursts. The river was angry. Then, the table moved. Not from our efforts, not from the ropes. It shifted, as if something beneath it was stirring. Malik grabbed onto it, trying to steady himself. The moment his fingers clenched the gold, his body jerked violently. His eyes rolled back, his limbs went stiff. Then his entire body convulsed as if something unseen was pulling him inside out. I tried to reach him, but the current was too strong. The river was fighting to keep its prize. Then suddenly he was gone, swallowed by the silt, dragged down into the murk with terrifying speed. I screamed into my regulator, my hands clawing at empty water. The table still gleamed, untouched, waiting for me. I turned and swam as hard as I could, kicking against the unnatural pull of the river. The weight of the water pressed against my chest, the whispers chasing me through the depths. Leave it. I broke the surface with a ragged gasp, hauling myself onto the riverbank. My lungs burned, my heart pounded, but I was alive. Malik was gone. The golden table remained below, glinting softly in the moonlight, as if mocking me. I sat there, dripping and trembling, staring at the water that had just swallowed my friend. The river was silent now, smooth and undisturbed. No one would believe me. No one ever does. I left that place. I tried to move on, but something followed me. At night, I dream of the depths, of Malik's wide, frozen eyes as he was pulled under. In the silence, I hear whispers, low and insistent. Some nights, I wake to the sound of water dripping inside my house, even though all the faucets are dry. And sometimes, just sometimes, I see her, standing at the foot of my bed, hair floating as if she were still underwater, watching, waiting, because she knows and I know, the river never lets its secrets go. And some treasures are not meant to be found. 5 stories, 5 different people, 5 warnings. Believe them or don't. But if you ever find yourself by the river, and you hear a soft voice singing, turn around, and walk away.